Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Now, the US-Canada trade conflict has sharply escalated after negotiations collapsed, triggering 50% American tariffs on billions of dollars in Canadian goods and a promise of dollar-for-dollar retaliation from Ottawa. The dispute now raises deeper questions about North American integration and Canada's economic dependence on its southern neighbor. Joining us today on TVP World to assess the business fallout and opportunities for Europe is Bernhard Otterstein, president of the Polish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good to be here again, thank you.
So just days ago, Canada and the United States seems to be close to an agreement, and now negotiations have collapsed, and we're talking about a 50% tariff and Canadian retaliation as well. What went wrong there?
I think only the people that were in the room know exactly what went wrong, but there are certain rumors circulating that both sides changed their mind towards the end. And of course, from the Canadian side, we think it was the Americans. The Americans are basically saying the opposite. So whatever the reason was, it was not made officially known, but there were some disagreements towards the end. I think what's important to realize, though, is that these negotiations don't apply to the entire trade relationship between Canada and the US. They apply to 5% or so of that relationship. So it's really part of an ongoing series of negotiations and discussions around the whole trade relationship. And I think it needs to be put into perspective in that sense.
Right, definitely. And that's very important what you mentioned. We're only talking about a 5% of the goods being talked about, not the entirety. Can you help us differentiate that, and how big of an impact do you think realistically that will bring to the grand scheme of things?
The entire trade relationship between the two countries is close to $1 trillion per year in goods exchanged. It's over 800 million, but I think it might be approaching $1 trillion by now. And so if you look at the actual goods that were being discussed yesterday, the value was about $20 to $28 billion. So it's really a tiny part of the total. And in that sense, I think that yesterday's breakdown in discussions was more of a sort of a bad happenstance along the way. And it doesn't sort of bode well, because the whole arrangement under the USMCA agreement is being reviewed this year. So it doesn't really bode well for that review, right. But in itself, it's a little part of the whole thing.
Right, you mentioned a USMCA. Do you think that this kind of disagreement right now we're seeing is sort of an isolated thing, or do you think it's something broader that is to come?
It's probably a symptom of where the relationship is right now, and that's sort of on uncertain territory. Right. It has political aspects to it, though. It's not just all about trade. I think that the USMCA, or CUSMA as we call it in Canada, we just changed the letters around, it really is the bedrock of the North American trade relationship and environment. It includes Mexico, of course, and between the three countries, we have 500 million people, 30% of the world's economy or economic output. And it's a really, really important relationship. We cannot escape our geography. We're on that continent together. And so whatever happens around the political or round by round trade negotiation scenario, you know, that's part of the whole thing. But we have to really remember that it's much bigger than that. And it's very important to all partners.
Right, like you mentioned, you cannot really escape geography. And Canada has been talking about diversifying, looking for other partners. But do you think realistically that can be achievable, or whatever is being tariffed can be replaced by a European market?
Some of it can, and certainly over time. And it should be, because we should diversify. It only makes sense. You should never put all your eggs into one basket. And diversification has been going on over the past 20 or 30 years. And that's a good thing. However, it's also important to remember that certain things like energy or natural resources or steel or aluminum, things that are heavy and hard to move around the world, are better traded on the same continent. And so that's what's actually been happening, of course. Canada's a huge exporter of energy and other and resources to the United States. And the United States needs our lumber to build their houses, our steel to build their infrastructure and their vehicles and all that. So it's really a question of how much should you diversify away? And the answer is probably a whole bunch, a lot. But we should also remember that if and when we're on the same continent and we're all doing business together, that that's still the foundation of the trading regime. Right?
Now, Ottawa has promised to retaliate dollar for dollar. From a business perspective, does Canada risk hurting its own companies and consumer more than the United States?
I think that any tit-for-tat response and then the counter-response is risky. It's understandable. And I think that what the Prime Minister of Canada said last night or this morning, on that front, it reflects Canada's frustration, but also its resolve to stay united, to stand up for its sovereignty, and not to capitulate, right? And to say, well, if they're going to do it, we have to do it too. And I think that's fair. But it's a little bit dangerous to go in that direction. And the ultimate effects of that wait to be seen.
Now, speaking of one of the effects, do you think that this trade war can actually create any opportunity for Poland, for example? Are Canadian companies now looking at Europe more seriously as any sort of alternative market or investment destinations?
Definitely, yes. I think we're seeing incredible cooperation on the energy security front, on the critical minerals front, on IT, ICT, cybersecurity, on mining, on defense and dual use. We're seeing really a lot of cooperation. And just as an example, two months ago, we had the premier of one of the Canadian provinces, Saskatchewan, here, and he just signed a big deal to export Canadian potash into Poland and then to distribute it to other countries from a Polish entry point. So that's just one little example. But we have many others in aerospace and defense and as I said, mining and critical minerals, as well as in energy, where Canada is leading on the nuclear power plant development campaign in Poland as well. So there's lots of areas where we can diversify, and we are. And I think we'll find a lot of other products or sectors where we can increase that.
Anything in particular that you find to have the most potential where Poland and Canada can work together?
There are some ideas, for example, about trying to get Canadian LNG to Poland, which it badly needs, and to diversify its own supplies, Poland. However, we don't have the infrastructure on the right coast right now, and so we're looking at different things in that regard. But I think other than that, certainly in dual-use technologies, in high-precision manufacturing, in high technologies and ICT, there's lots of stuff to be done. And of course, on the nuclear power plant front, which Canada is really, I think, offering some interesting solutions to Poland on.
And you mentioned earlier as well, Poland can not just be a place to have customers, but also for distribution to the continent as well. Do you think that Poland can essentially become a gateway, a portal for Canadian companies into Central and Eastern Europe, rather than just being a market of 38 million consumers?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that Canada not only can be a gateway for products or goods coming through, but also for adding value to Canadian supply chains. Doing some high precision manufacturing, adding that value and then letting that go out into the global supply chains. Poland and Canada work together in that way. We've been doing that for a few decades, but it's growing all the time. And so, yes, the answer is yes, absolutely.
Now, here's a question. If you're running a Canadian company today that happens to be affected by the current trade fallout, what do you do Monday morning? Do you wait for a politician to reach some sort of deal, or do you start redesigning your supply chain right now just to avoid any sort of fallout?
It's both on the supply and the demand side. I mean, it's going to affect the companies that are manufacturing the goods that are affected by today's or yesterday's breakdown in talks. But again, the Canadian governments at the federal and provincial level, and even going down into the municipal level, or certainly for public tenders and the business community, they're really united in standing up and saying, well, we're going to deal with this. We're not giving up. We're going to survive, and we're going to be strong. So I think in that sense, there are many programs being discussed now to help the affected companies, with temporary relief and things like that, to not lose employment opportunities or just to have companies remain viable.
Right, and going back to that fallout in the first place, like you mentioned, well, you have to be in the room to know actually what happened. But do you think there's a possibility that this kind of dispute can be negotiated away, or are we going to see fundamental change between the U.S. and Canadian kind of economic relationship?
I would hope that it can be negotiated away. It does require political will, though. And if that political will is stronger than the barriers to agreement, then yes, it will happen. But if there are still sort of fundamental differences in, well, no, because we don't want to do that, and that's not going to work. So we would need to have, I think, an openness on both sides to be able to not only repair the relationship, but actually to acknowledge its importance and then to build it and make it stronger.
All right, so let's put it this way. If you had Prime Minister Mark Carney, President Trump sitting across the same table from you tomorrow, what do you tell each of them?
Interesting question. I think I would try to encourage them to acknowledge that they're actually great neighbors and friends and that they need to come to an agreement right now at the table.
All right, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.